Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephanie Ivick. I'm the Content Marketing Manager here at eLearning Brothers. We have a really great guest presenter for you today, but first I'll go over a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and you'll receive an email with a link to the recording afterwards. If you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to put them in the questions panel. We will be answering those live, and if we run out of time, we will do our best to follow up with you offline afterwards. Joining me today is Andrew Dawson, the co-founder and CEO of Traliant. Traliant was recently ranked one of the fastest growing compliance companies on the Inc. 500 list, and eLearning Brothers has partnered with Traliant to integrate their award-winning compliance training into our Rockstar Learning platform. We're really excited to show you a little bit of that today, as well as give you strategies you can use when building your own diversity training. And so without further ado, Andrew, I'll turn the time over to you and make you the presenter.
Thank you, Stephanie. Let's see if I can figure this out. Are we seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my name is Andrew Rawson, and we're partnering with eLearning Brothers and providing all of our content in their Rockstar platform. And the things I'm going to talk about today will hopefully be things that, whether you use our training, whether you use the Rockstar Learning platform or not, that they're things that you'll find helpful in planning out and executing on a DEI or related compliance program strategy. It's there's some things that are fundamentally different about compliance training, and my my standard paradox or joke on it is that how is selling coffins like selling compliance training? The answer is that people that buy it don't use it, and the people who it's intended for don't want to use it. And hopefully that got a little chuckle. And the reason you chuckled is because there's some truth to it, and that we're being held to a higher standard when people don't want to take your training. And that's not always true, because certainly in the world of DE&I, there is a lot of interest in that. But I'll talk about some techniques and some things that we do, and that if you use our training through the Rockstar platform, you'll take advantage of. But even if you don't, there are things that you can do in building your own training. And again, we, I started out doing webcasts a long time ago. I used to, have pre-written questions to make sure that, we didn't get anything too hard. But you know what? The world has changed, and please enter your text into the box for any questions. If there are general interest questions, Steph will interrupt me and I'll answer them the best I can. If I have an answer, I'll share it. And if I don't, I'll say I don't have an answer to it. So before I dive in, I want to kind of work backwards and show some survey results first, because I'm going to talk about a lot of things today, like there are these objective truths, and, particularly these days, right? What's an objective truth? But we do have lots and lots of survey data that is a good proof point. And I want to start with that because I think it hopefully gives legitimacy to some of the things I'm going to talk about today. So the first thing is that, actually, before I even talk about the survey results, it's a critical concept. What I just mentioned a second ago, there's a big difference between compliance training and other types of training. Compliance training, for the most part, is behavior-based, meaning you want people to behave a certain way, not to demonstrate knowledge of something, like in skills-based training. So I think it's important to keep in mind, it's not what you know, it's what you do. And the real question about how effective training is are people going to change their behavior based upon your training? That's kind of the holy grail. So we do now have over 10,000 completed surveys where 90% of the people said they're likely or very likely to use a skill or behavior they learned in one of our courses. And the reason that's important, it's not that it's so great for Traliant. The point is that the things I'm going to talk about and techniques we use are things that you can deploy yourself, and I think that'll help make your courses more effective. Kind of the other proof point is that, and sorry about the formatting here, when asking our clients about it, the Net Promoter Score is on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend this product or service to someone else? And it's an interesting benchmark, because 0 is right up in the middle at the 50%. So you can have a negative Net Promoter Score, and typically people with negative ones are banks and airlines and so on. And then retail brands like, Apple and Bose and so on, they have very high ones. So our net promoter score for a couple of our courses is up around 60, which is really considered best in class. And again, not that it's so great for us, but it just hopefully validates the things that we're going to be talking about. And actually, I just referred to this. We've got over 1 million course completions. Now we're up over, this was slides a few months old. We had over 5,000 completions. Now we have over 10,000 completed surveys. And now it's not 70% rate is 4 or 5. It's actually between 80 and 90%. Okay, so let's talk about some key concepts here. Probably the most important thing we've learned in creating compliance training is that people remember stories, not facts. The reason anytime you see a politician in front of a TV screen selling something is that they always show a line, and the line is even going up at a 45-degree slope or down at a 45-degree slope, because graphs tell stories, and people remember stories, not facts. So every time we can, we try to tell something as a story as opposed to here's some facts. The other point is that knowledge transfer does not correlate to behavior. I am confident that Andrew Cuomo got 100% on his prevention of sexual harassment training, and so did Harvey Weinstein, 5 years ago. But just because you know something doesn't mean you're going to behave a certain way. The other thing to keep in mind in your training is that you don't want to make it so filled with facts and figures and things that we did and not did and so on that people end up saying, I took this training, but at the end, I didn't know what to do. You want things to be actionable. If you're faced with this situation, here's what you need to do. And it's okay, particularly in the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The answer is not always concrete. It's so situational. And something else I'll mention here. When you roll out your DE&I training, you will be criticized because it will be wrong, because things are changing. And it's important not to be defensive and to be open and to listen because the world is just changing. I'll give you a good example of that. Every company, it's a little bit of exaggeration, but most companies that we used to work with, that their consensual relationship policy among colleagues was that it couldn't be within the same branch of the organizational chart. So someone in marketing could not have a relationship with somebody above them or below them in the marketing department. But and this only goes back maybe a year, after the CEO of McDonald's resigned for a consensual relationship, all of the companies we work with changed their policies and said, you cannot have a relationship with someone that's on a different rung of the ladder, whether it's in your stream or not, because the belief is that the power differential makes it impossible for the junior person to make it consensual. If a senior person asks the receptionist out on a date, the receptionist, by definition, is not really free to say no. And then finally, that you want to tell stories that are dramatic. The definition of dramatic is tension, and telling stories that have that are dramatic are impactful. That's what good television is, what good movies are. And we do that by showing the consequences of right and wrong behavior. If you do this, then this happens, and that's cringeworthy. And if you do that, that's a good thing that happened. You feel great that somebody's heroic. So dramatic stories are good stories because they're memorable. So just to talk about kind of what's happened in the world in the last couple of years, this graph here shows, risk management on the vertical axis, meaning how dangerous it is to get something wrong. And the higher it is on here, the more dangerous it is to your brand and your internal brand, your external brand. And across the bottom is what's a must-have, the meaning it's legally required, or whether it should have, or whether it's nice to have. And what's happened, and by the way, a general way to think about things is the way we think about things is the traditional prevention of sexual harassment, discrimination training. That's what you must do. But diversity, equity, and inclusion is really what you should do, because other than a couple of states that have passed laws training people, healthcare providers on unconscious bias, there's no laws that I know of requiring teaching on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And also the other thing to keep in mind is an organization can become diverse simply by executive fiat. In other words, the most senior person in the organization can tell the head of the head of HR, we need to be more diverse, and we're going to hire diverse candidates, and they can do that. But you can't make an organization inclusive unless people want to. And that goes back to my point about you're building training or rolling out training that people, for the most part, aren't excited about taking. So you've got to keep the fact that you've got an unwilling audience in mind, and you're really held to a higher standard. So what's happened with these groups of training here over the years is that the risk of getting any of these things wrong has gotten much higher. Interestingly, we have found that companies that have very valuable retail brands are incredibly focused on making sure that they've got organizations that are diverse and equitable and inclusive as possible, because they realize it's important not just internally to their coworkers, but externally to their brand as well. So all of the things, the cost of getting any of these topics wrong, preventing discrimination, harassment, DEI, or any of the related enrichment topics, has gotten greater. And these circles are moving to the left, where now diversity, equity, and inclusion, before the George Floyd killing, that was kind of a nice to have, and it's really moved to a must have now. So I think that's important to keep in mind too. So when you're putting together a curriculum, and I'll stress this, the courses, the titles, the topics, the sequence, yes, they're all important because you can't execute the strategy if you don't have one. But having the strategy itself is also part of the message. If you just think about it for a second, if you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion is important in our organization, and there's just some executive announcement comes out, and there's some email or something, or a one-time webcast they ask people to attend, and then you're silent for the rest of the year, what message does that really send? So it's having the strategy and having the curriculum is really important, but executing on it is really almost as important as the content itself, and keeping in mind that you will get criticized, and it's okay, because it's an important topic, it's an evolving topic, and there's not really objective agreement. I mean, we've done stuff about, published things about preferred pronouns, and we got a very thoughtful email from someone that said, explaining why preferred pronouns is not a great use of the word preferred. So we do think the core topics are around prevention of discrimination, harassment, and diversity, equity, inclusion. But then absolutely, and would be a better graphic here, would be kind of a hub and spokes, but then enriching people with unconscious bias training and microaggressions and bystander intervention and cultural competency. And I'll talk more about cultural competency in a minute, because we think that's where we've learned that that's not a great title either. So I just mentioned that the just the rhythm, the communication itself is part of the, delivers part of the benefits, because it's the reinforcing message that we're serious about this. But it also correlates with the with addressing the forgetting curve, right? That things rolled out once a year and are done on the left. Not only people forget just technically, but also spiritually. You're not reinforcing that you care about it. As a matter of fact, that would be a better way of expressing these two charts here, is it's the spiritual reminder that we're serious about this and we care about it, rather than just the factual retention, which is kind of implies. So a better way to think about this, and I think you guys all get copies of this, but it's the spiritual retention and the keeping the message top of mind that's really important about rolling out a curriculum over time. So when we talk about an integrated approach, right, the cadence itself is part of the message. You can't overestimate the power of repetition. It doesn't sound like a great thing, and you don't have to say it the same way, but repeating the message that we're serious about having a diverse, inclusive, and equitable workplace is really important. Very important, and here's just a factual, experiential tip. You always, when you can, get management and supervision on board first. If you have the ability to say, we're going to train our most senior management in the first 2 weeks, and then we're going to train all frontline management in the second 2 weeks, and then we're going to roll it out enterprise-wide starting after 4 weeks. The great thing about doing that is, and obviously tell your people you're doing this, is that gets them on board. That they say, listen, we're not training the employees first. We want you to be comfortable with the material. If you have any questions, come back and ask us, because there's nothing that undermines that curriculum and that program worse than an employee goes to a manager and says, hey, I have a question about this training. And they say, I haven't seen it yet. I mean, it just undermines everything. And then to reinforce the fact that you will hear feedback, both positive and negative, but that's okay. As a matter of fact, I would even argue that any feedback is positive, because that means people are paying attention. And right, that's the worst thing you can say about compliance training. What was it? One of those boring click next courses. So when you get people to pay attention and they give you feedback, all feedback is valuable. So, here's an example of the type of curriculum we see people rolling out. And it's really all about aligning the deed from the top with the tone from the top, right? The tone from the top has been an expression used for years about, when senior management says a message about, it's usually in the world of, anti-corruption, anti-bribery, and so on. What's the tone from the top? But we like to say that you got to match the deed from the top, and this is a way of doing it. So this is just showing how you've got these core topics, which might be training that's 30 or maybe 40 minutes, which is about the human endurance these days of compliance training. And then you want to integrate those enrichment topics in there, and they're enrichment topics because microaggressions and unconscious bias and cultural competency and bystander intervention are all covered in the core courses, but these kind of go deeper into it. And then you want to integrate your communications, your newsletters, your programs, your workshops, your employee resource groups, whatever the things you're doing around that, so that integrated calendar and it's the executing on this calendar that is a huge part of making your program effective. If there's a number one message from my talk today, it's about making sure you put together a calendar, and even if you modify it, it's okay, but don't just make it one and done, because that kind of backfires with people. So now let's kind of take a look at some of these techniques that we found to be very effective in delivering.
Andrew, before we jump into the next part, we did have an audience question. They were wondering, what is the alternative to saying preferred pronouns? What is the other way you can say it?
I don't know, but because I just saw the email, but I will get that. And I think they sent us a link to something explaining why preferred pronouns was not considered proper, but I will get that and I will share it with you, and we'll get it back out to everybody.
Yes, yeah, we can put that in our blog recap of this. Thank you.
Yes, but I'm anxious to read that myself and find out why. And by the way, remember I mentioned cultural competency and why that wasn't a good term, and then it's really cultural humility. And what somebody said to me, a VP of DEI said, cultural competency, well, that's the buzzword and that's what people talk about looking for, but it's really kind of condescending that I'm going to learn about your culture, and I'm going to be able to understand you. And it's not really, it's like I study you as like a project. But humility, the best definition of humility I ever heard, which I remember to this day, is that it's the concept that we're all equal. So cultural humility is actually a much better expression, that we're going to learn to talk to each other as equals, and I'm going to understand you as an equal, so hopefully you can understand me that. So the same way we switch from cultural competency to cultural humility, we keep using the term cultural competency because that's what people are searching for, but we do in the training itself refer to it as both. So the same way I'll find out what pronouns is, and what the feedback is on that, and share it with everybody.
We're getting some audience feedback saying you just say pronouns. By saying preferred, you're implying that it's a choice and not how the person identifies themselves naturally. So
see, awesome. I'm learning.
And, yeah, we'll follow up with that link though to put some more information in for everybody. Thank you.
So let's take a look at some of these the techniques that we've learned that have been very, very powerful. Now, unfortunately, GoToWebinar doesn't allow me to share my audio, so I'll kind of do one of those director cuts and talk about this video here for a second. But here are some key points from what I'm going to show you here. And you can read the subtitles are on, the closed captioning, so you can read those too, is number one, and hopefully today, if you're hoping I talk about something and I keep droning on and not addressing it, it's frustrating because you want to hear it. So we try to anticipate what our learners are thinking about and address that right up front. Number two, we're trying to be careful never to insult our learners' intelligence, because that's a terrible thing to do. And we don't try to oversell the training. Like, if you take this training, this is going to change the world. We're not trying to change the world. We're not going to change the Andrew Cuomo's or the Harvey Weinsteins of the world. They're psychopaths. We're not going to change them. We're not going to change the people that are good and decent, thoughtful human beings and are going to be thoughtful in their word and deed anyway. We're trying to influence the great masses in the middle, and we try to talk about all this. So in this video clip here, what we did to kind of address all these things is this training was modified just after the George Floyd killing, where we wanted to let people know that that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a great topic, but if it doesn't address racism, it's missing the point. So what happens here is, and I realize you can't hear this, is John starts to speak, and he's talking about, you can read the closed captioning, I'll be your host today. And then what happens is the course gets the signal starts to get jammed. And what happens is Adrian comes on the screen and says, we interrupt this diversity and inclusion training. And she goes on to say, to talk about the elephant in the room, racism. And knowing that people are not excited about taking the training, but when they see this and all of a sudden, because you couldn't hear it, but it gets all staticky and something's interrupting the broadcast literally, and Adrian comes on to talk about the elephant in the room, it got people's attention and it didn't insult their intelligence. And then she goes on to speak about all the things that we're going to cover and talking about, we've got to talk about that elephant in the room. And she talks about the fact that it's difficult to talk about because we know this people are thinking about. So just the fact that, I meant to stop that here, I'm sorry. What Adrian said is it would be naive to think that this training is going to solve a century-old problem. So by doing this, we're trying to win the hearts and minds of the learners so that they'll be more receptive to the material that follows. So that's just one example of how we take the techniques I've talked about and build them into, this happens to be an introductory video, but in anything you do, the medium doesn't matter. It's the message about talking about things that people are thinking about, don't insult their intelligence, and not to oversell the impact. So in a course on unconscious bias, which interestingly is probably assigned almost more than any other course, and I think one reason is that it's really the toughest to write. It's a paradox. If it's unconscious, how can I address it? So we all work on it, but we do things here to try to get people's attention, right? And so what is, we talk about unconscious bias, but actually in reality, it's both conscious and unconscious. And it is really a journey, not a destination, right? Because you've got to continually question your assumptions, but to make things interesting. So here's a guy all tatted up with his, sleeveless shirt on, and maybe some of us, I know I do, might make assumptions about what this person might do for a living, but then in fact, maybe the person's a doctor, right? And we try to do things like that that are kind of fun, and even if that people, guess what we're doing, it's still better than the just old click next stuff. And then actually bystander intervention, I take that back, might even be more important. Are more frequently assigned than unconscious bias. What makes the bystander intervention, this was kind of it did not have the prominence it did until Harvey Weinstein story broke in October of 2017. And not only did that really kind of bring the Me Too movement front and center, but there are many people came forth, notably the director that did Pulp Fiction, famous guy, name escapes me, but he came out and said, you know what, me culpa. I knew he was doing this and I should have spoken up and I didn't. And what we all came to realize is, so getting people to stop the bad behavior before it happens is job number one, but job number two is getting bystanders to intervene. And bystander intervention is not if you see somebody steal a purse from a little old lady in the street, running after them and tackling them. That's not what it is. There are actually well-defined and known techniques, and there's 3 different ones of disrupt, confront, and support. And we go through it and we train on each one of those because you have to choose the right technique that's appropriate to the environment. If you're a junior person in a conference room and your boss's boss is there and he or she is making inappropriate comments, it's really not going to be effective for you to speak up. I mean, God, feel free, to do so, of course, but it probably won't be as effective, and most people probably won't at that moment confront the person. And but in that situation, they should support them. And of course, we always teach at the end that you need to that everything needs to be reported. But bystander intervention, those techniques are so important because group behavior is so important. If everybody so the boss is saying something terrible and everybody looks at their shoes, that's not so great. But if one person does confront, so maybe there's not the power differential I just described. There's a meeting of peers and somebody says something inappropriate and one person speaks up and says, Andrew, that's really not appropriate what you're saying. You realize the message you're sending there, and someone else is then supports it. So group behavior is very important in bystander intervention. But training people on the actionable techniques avoids this just high level, well, if you see bad behavior, intervene. Well, teach me how to intervene. And that's what this is all about. And then I kind of already touched on this about cultural competency is the buzzword, but cultural humility is more respectful of our peers. And right, the competency is a buzzword, but humility is more humane. And we really try to talk in the training, talk about that. And if you're developing your own cultural competency, I think feel free to replace it as much as you can with humility, because we do think that resonates more with people. And it's obviously great if somebody says, why do you call it cultural humility, not cultural competency? To explain why it's more respectful, and cultural competency is actually a bit condescending. Let me see, how am I doing my time? Okay. So microaggressions is a little different than other types of bad behavior in the workplace, because more than anything else, microaggressions can be unintentional. And this is a video here, which we'll call kind of a confessional type of video. And what we try to do in any video, and again, even if you're not doing video, just in your writing and your communication, is we try never to, in our videos, never to do anything like, should he touch her or not touch her? Never to ask those ridiculously obvious questions that you don't have to take training. Just as a human being, you know the answer to. We hate that. You want to ask questions that are more nuanced. But when we show videos of behavior, we try to do what people do in what makes one reason reality television is so popular, is that you're watching the other person's train wreck. So again, you can't hear the audio track here, but you can read the closed captioning. And Ian comes on and says, hey, I just finished the training on microaggressions, and boy, the things I learned. And then he goes through all the different examples of all of the foot in the mouth, dumb things he's done, and realizing how really hurtful / insensitive they were. So I'll play this, and you'll just have to read the closed captions on the bottom. But the feedback we've gotten from this is that people said absolutely that it makes you feel good that I'm not the only one that have done this, and it definitely is it's got that reality TV cringeworthy. Other people are doing it, and thank God I didn't do that. So So I'll stop it here, but you get the idea that these are things that maybe we've said, and not specifically, but in that general genre, and then by intermixing it with, the still images and the thought bubbles, that going through all the different people that Ian offended, and again, without wagging our finger at anybody, and that's a term I haven't used in this presentation today, but nobody likes to have a finger wagged at them, and nobody learns from that. So by showing, and remember at the beginning I said we show the concept, the impact of the consequences of both the right and wrong behavior. That's a much better learning technique. And that goes back to what I'm proud of our survey results, but that's just those are the proof point that, generally speaking, wagging the finger at people doesn't really work, but showing them things that other people did wrong and showing the consequences of that are really effective in creating a real good DEI and related program. So another thing that's really important is to verticalize the message. If you're in, I've got some examples here of healthcare and hospitality and industrial, manufacturing. Whatever industry you're in, we do it as a provider of this type of training, but even if you're doing it yourself, having examples that are industry specific really do make a difference with people. And I'm going to show you examples of how we verticalize things. And it's not that hard to do. It's just a question of being thoughtful. It doesn't, to take a course that's written for a generic office based organization and creating a hospitality version is not that difficult. By going through and just simply substituting the images and changing the vocabulary and some of the jargon, it's really easy to do. And I'll give you some examples of the way we've done that. So this is an example of, we always, in our training, no matter what it is, we always have examples. And because we use this kind of, streaming metaphor of having a kind of like a talk show where we have an on-screen host and so on. But we disguise frequently asked questions as viewer emails. So this is an example where in hospitality, because we always have something about customers, what do you do when a customer makes you uncomfortable? So here's something where this was in a, and you can see in the back, this was a food service company, that here's somebody saying that, we have a customer that comes to all the time, makes me uncomfortable, hasn't really said anything, but what should I do about it? And by the way, that goes to, it's always good to do the subtleties. It's easier when someone says something outlandish to you, but what about when someone just makes you uncomfortable? How do you want your colleagues to handle that? But then, so here, we worked with the customer to come up with the example of that, you want to be careful not to offend your customers. They say our customers are a relationship, but you're also entitled to a workplace free of harassment. So they did kick this upstairs to their manager so that they can step in and talk to the person, and hopefully they'll do it in a very positive way and talk about how they value them as a customer, but that they're doing some things that are making some of their staff uncomfortable. But by making it, by having someone that works, this is a company that has thousands of quick serve outlets around the country, but it was very important to send the message to their frontline workers that if they were uncomfortable, they didn't have to, that was not something they had to tolerate. And to do the example in a hospitality setting was very simple to do. Here's the same question, and in financial services, where, although it's just funny, I realized this slide was supposed to be fixed and it's not, because it repeats the answer, the question. So here's the same question, but here, instead of, I'm in a quick serve restaurant, I'm in a financial services office, and one of our biggest customers comes in every couple of months, and it's a he, and he talks to me, and he thinks he's flirting with me, and it makes me incredibly uncomfortable. Am I supposed to speak them directly or not? And the answer is, again, which isn't here, is that no, you're not supposed to. And think about that for a second, right? You're in a financial service company, you're a junior person. Are you supposed to go to their big clients and confront them directly? You certainly can, but the organization wants you to know that we've got your back, and you don't have to tolerate that. And if you simply bring it to your manager's attention, that they'll figure out the right way to address the situation. So there are two examples about verticalizing the message about how do you handle a creepy customer. And okay, so there's just two I had. And then I just want to show you just real simple examples about how, because words and images do matter, that here's the same slide that was just simply modified for 3 different industries. On the bottom left here, this is about in healthcare, where the underlying question on the slide is, do the rules apply outside of the workplace? And as you all know, they do. So here, the laws and policies apply outside any hospital facility, right? So we put in hospital facility and then give examples of medical conference, meeting, restaurants, and other activities. And the answer is always the same. If the incident occurred outside, this is the question. If it occurred outside the hospital, is it still considered harassment? And it says, yes, the laws and policies apply outside any hospital facility, including these locations. But just to tweak it just a little bit to hospitality, where they refer to as off property, if an incident occurs off property, is it still considered harassment? And yeah, laws, they do apply off property, meals, business trips, and other outings. So just simple changes, and this is for construction. If the incident occurs outside the office at a construction site or another location, is it still considered harassment? And yes, laws and policies apply off-site too, including project meetings, subcontract office. So not hard to verticalize, just being a little thoughtful. And if you're in any of these industries, you'll know that jargon. You'll know what it is that you need to speak about, what it is you need to speak to. So if I can sum up kind of the net takeaway from today is, if you remember in building your curriculum around courses you have, or modifying existing courses or building new courses, if you can remember that your audience, in most cases, not in every case, but in most cases, you're speaking to a less than willing audience, and know that you have to do a better job, that's a good concept to keep in mind. You're going to be hold yourself to a higher standard. 100% focus on the behavior, not the facts. The people don't remember facts. That's not going to drive behavior. It's focus on the behavior and showing the consequences of good and bad behavior, and you'll have much more effective training. And then remember, the golden rule is, teach your learners the way you want to learn. The worst thing that anybody can say about any type of compliance training is, I didn't have to take that training, just give me the test. So don't do that to your learners. Teach them the way you want to be taught. And you'll see that people are saying, like, hey, this training this year was really pretty good. You guys really did a good job with it. And that's high praise in the world of compliance training. So that concludes my prepared remarks. And how did we do on time? I think okay. And I'm happy to answer any questions that I can, and we will get an answer to the thing about pronouns. But if there's other questions, please fire away.
Thank you, Andrew. That was great. We do have one question that ties in nicely to your last slide. Once training is delivered, do you have any tips for how to measure the effectiveness and the success of that training?
Yes, and I do, because what we've realized is, right, just test scores, and they're okay, but they're kind of meaningless, right? Because most training is just, if you don't get 80%, then you take the test again until you get 100%. So what are you really measuring there? The survey questions are much more indicative, and we think, and we'll get this to you, we think the survey question is on the Likert scale, 1 to 5. How likely are you to use a skill or behavior you learned in this training? And you actually get two valuable pieces of data from that. One, you get a result of from 1 to 5, but also we give people another choice that says, NA, I did not learn anything new in this training. And we found that we get less than 3% of the people check that box, which we found incredibly encouraging, because, right, everybody thinks they know it all already. But we'll share that question with you when we think that's the question to ask at the end of the day. Yes, the the fact-based questions, the assessment questions are still important. I'm not suggesting you get rid of those, but ask that one question: how likely are you to use a skill or behavior you learned in this training?
Awesome, thank you. Then we've got another question. Could you share some strategies you've used to accomplish reinforcing the training through various activities, refreshers throughout the year? So maybe some examples of different types of activities that you've seen successfully used to reinforce the training.
So we don't like the term refresher because, again, going back to the fact that we're selling a product that people aren't excited about buying because they think they knew it all the first time. So now I'm going to remind them of something they already thought they knew. We do have a collection of what we call sparks because our concept is we'd rather spark a conversation than go over something you think you already know. So it's not that we have activities as much as we have sparks, which are very short. They're between 1 minute and 2 minutes. They are videos only, and they're designed to spark a conversation about a very timely topic. For instance, one of the big problems with getting people to intervene or report incidents is people don't believe that an organization says, no, you won't be retaliated against. Don't worry about it. People don't believe that. So we have a spark on retaliation where we've got somebody, the video is filmed kind of selfie style, where this person is talking about that they were assuring a colleague that, no, the company is serious about hearing these things. And if they don't hear about it, we can't fix it. So we don't have activities, but we do have packages of these sparks that cover these topics that we want people to stay top of mind. And I think I showed that in, I didn't, but we could put a third stripe in here, or sorry, a fifth stripe in here that talked about sparks, which we like to think of as purely optional. They're not required training, but they're very short. They're very lightweight. We realize that what we're talking about does not lend itself to humor, so they're not funny certainly, but they have a lighter tone than some of the other training. So that's kind of the best I can answer that question. Is that we do have stuff to that you can use to keep these key topics top of mind. Over the year, we have things that cover clicks and making people feel welcome and invited and things like that.
Awesome. I think that's a great answer. We have more of a attendee comment suggesting that another survey question you could ask is, how safe or respected do your workers feel on the job as it relates to the topics addressed, which would be a good way to kind of show you how well your training is working to improve your company culture and make sure everybody's getting it.
I love it. And what I just in my kind of excitement forgot to mention is the questions about how likely to use a skill and behavior is great about bystander intervention, microaggressions, and so on. But we think we do ask, or just started to ask a version of that question about the DE&I training, which is, I think, in the same vein, and I should have, and I didn't remember this, is how comfortable are you that you feel you can bring your whole self to work every day? And the same way as that question, which is a fabulous one, and maybe we'll morph ours based on that. But we think that's, if you can ask just one question, right? Because I learned that from working with a big cosmetics company that has an extremely diverse organization. And they said that, it's real, that's how they measure it, that people feel like they can be who they are and they don't have to hide who they are, and that they're welcome as the person they are. And that's a great feeling if work is a place that, if you're at a place that's not considered mainstream by society, if you go to work every place that you feel safe, I mean, how wonderful is that? Just as human being to human being, if that's your safe place, man. So I agree with that comment. We'll probably morph our question, but yes, our version of that is, how confident are you that you can bring your whole self to work every day? But thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. And now I've been saving my favorite question for last. And the question is, can these Traliant courses be imported into an LMS? And I am thrilled to announce that they're already integrated into the Rockstar Learning platform. But of course, you can also use them with any LMS of your choice.
Yes, they can do that. We've done all the easy stuff. You know what I mean by that? It runs on mobile. It runs on Android, iOS, tablets or phones, Macs or PCs. The only thing we don't support is Linux, I think, but it'll run anywhere.
All right, awesome. Those are all the questions we have. I'm going to take over the screen just for one last thing. All right, so as I mentioned, these awesome award-winning compliance courses are integrated into the Rockstar Learning platform, and you can get a free account on our website that gives you up to 5 learners, 1 admin, unlimited courses, support from us. It's really a great way to try it out and see if it will work for your organization. And then eLearning Brothers can also help you out building courses, connect you with authoring tools. We are a full service learning solutions provider. So just visit our website or reach out to us to learn more about that. And thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us today. I learned a lot. I think our attendees learned a lot. Oh, they did want to let you know that Quentin Tarantino was the director. His name
he was right.
We got a lot.
I thought that was very brave of him. He had nothing to gain by that, and I thought that was very brave of him, his admitting his failure.
Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone. You will receive a recording of this in your emails tomorrow, and we hope to see you all on our next webinar. Have a great day.